Settlers of Catan Almanac. This Catan Almanac contains detailed alphabetical entries and examples for Catan. These are not the game rules. You do not have to read this material or listen to this material prior to your first game. Instead, use the game rules. Then read this to enjoy, or listen to this to enjoy the complete experience. If you have any questions, this almanac includes the advanced rules and clarifications, and you can also refer to it if any questions arise during a game. Building. So B. You may build on your first turn after you have rolled for resource production and finished trading. To build, you must turn in the specified combinations of resource cards. See the building costs cards. Return the resource cards to the supply stacks. You can build as many items and buy as many cards as you desire, as long as you have enough resources to pay for them and they are still available in the supply. See settlements, cities, roads, and development cards. Each player has a supply of 15 roads, 5 settlements, and 4 cities. If you build a city, return the settlement to your supply. Roads and cities, however, remain on the board until the end of the game once they are built. Your turn is over after building, and the player to your left continues the game. New rule variant C combined trade build phase. Building costs cards. The building costs cards show what can be built and which resources are required. When you pay building costs, you must return the necessary resources to the supply stacks. You can build settlements and roads, upgrade settlements to cities, and buy development cards. C. Cities. You cannot build a city directly. You can only upgrade an existing settlement to a city. You pay the required resources, return the settlement to your supply, and replace the settlement with a city on the same intersection. Each city is worth 2 victory points. You receive double resource production 2 resource cards from the adjacent terrain hexes whenever those numbers are rolled. When you build a city, the upgraded settlement piece becomes available again. You can use it to build another settlement later. It is extremely difficult to win the game without upgrading settlements to cities. Since you only have 5 settlements available, you can only reach 5 victory points by only building settlements. Coast. Border. When a terrain hex borders on the sea, or the border piece, it is called a coast. You can build a road along a coast. You can build settlements and upgrade settlements to cities on intersections that border on the sea. However, since a site on the coast borders only 1 or 2 terrain hexes, coastal settlements generate smaller resource yields. Still, coastal sites often lie on harbors, which allow you to use maritime trade to trade resources at more favorable rates. Combined trade build phase. The separation of the trade and build phases was introduced to make the sequence easier to learn for beginners. We recommend experienced players to ignore this separation. After rolling for resource production, you can trade and build in any order. You can trade, build, trade again, and build again, etc. You can even use a harbor on the same turn you build a settlement there. Using this method speeds the game up a lot. Desert. D. Desert. The desert is the only terrain hex that does not produce resources. The robber starts the game there. A settlement or city built adjacent to the desert yields fewer resources than those built next to one of the other terrain types. Development cards. There are 3 different kinds of cards: night cards, progress cards, and victory point cards. When you buy a development card, the progress cards are 3 different types. So it's road and monopoly and invention. When you buy a development card, take the top card of the draw pile into your hand. Keep your development cards hidden until you play them. This keeps the other players in the dark. You cannot trade or give away development cards. You may only play 1 development card during your turn, either 1 night card or 1 progress card. You can play the card at any time, even before you roll the dice. You may not, however, play a card that you bought during the same turn. Exception: if you buy a card and it is a victory point card that brings you to 10 points, you may immediately reveal this card and all other VP cards and win the game. You only reveal victory point cards when the game is over, once you or an opponent reaches 10 plus victory points and declares victory. Distance rule. You may only build a settlement on an unoccupied intersection, and only if none of the 3 adjacent intersections contains a settlement or city. Domestic trade. On your turn, you may trade resources with the other players. After rolling for resource production, you and the other players negotiate the terms of your trades, such as which cards will be exchanged. You may trade as many times as you can using single or multiple cards. However, you cannot give away cards or trade matching resources. While it is your turn, you must be a part of all trades, and all of the other players may not trade among themselves. Ending the game. If you have or reach 10 victory points on your turn, the game ends immediately and you win. You can only win during your You can only win during your turn. If somehow you find you have 10 victory points during another player's turn, you must wait until your next turn to claim victory. G. Okay, so I'm sorry I had to stop the recording, so I'm not quite sure where I ended up. But yeah, I'll just start at G again. G. Gameplay. Here's a summary of the game sequence, plus some more specific entries where you can find details. Layout the game board, setup variable. Initial setup phase. Play is the third one, yeah. The starting player begins the game. The other players follow in clockwise order. On your turn, you complete the 3 phases in order. Roll for resource production. The roll applies to all players. Trade and build. You may play 1 development card anytime during your turn. Pass the dice to the player on your left at the end of your turn. That player then takes their turn using the same 3 phases. H. Harbors. Harbors allow you to trade resources more favorably. In order to control a harbor, you must build a settlement on a coastal intersection which borders the harbor. See also Maritime Trade. So the harbors are just like, yeah. There's a, oh yeah, so it's pretty self-explanatory, yeah. I. Intersections. Intersections are the points where 3 hexes meet. See illustration. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You may only build settlements on intersections. The influence for resource yields of settlements and cities extends to the 3 adjacent terrain hexes that form the intersection. K. Knight cards. When you play a knight development card during your turn, you must immediately move the robber. Please place the knight card face up in front of you. You must move the robber away from its current spot and onto the number token of any other terrain hex on the desert. You then steal 1 resource card from a player who is a settlement or a city adjacent to the robber. If there are 2 or more such players, you may choose your victim. The player you elect to rob keeps their cards from face down while you take 1 of their cards at random. If that player has no cards, you get nothing. However, you can always ask players about the number of cards they hold. They must answer truthfully. If you are the first player to have 3 knight cards face up in front of you, you take the largest army special cards. This special card is worth 2 victory points. If another player has more face-up knight cards than you, they take the special card and the 2 victory points that go with it, so the other player loses the victory points. Largest army. If you are the first player to play 3 knight cards, you receive this special card, which is worth 2 victory points. You place the largest army card face up in front of you. If another player plays more knight cards than you have, they immediately take the special card. The 2 victory points likewise count for the new owner. Longest road. If you are the first player to build a continuous road of at least 5 individual road pieces, you take the special card and place it face up in front of you. This card is worth 2 victory points. Note: if your road network branches, you may only count the single longest branch for the purposes of the longest road. If you hold the longest road card and another player builds a longer road, they immediately take your longest road card. They also acquire the 2 bonus victory points. Since you also lose the 2 victory points, it's a 4-point swing. You can break an opponent's road by building a settlement on an unoccupied intersection along that road. Special case. If your longest road is broken and you are tied for longest road, you still keep the longest road card. However, if you no longer have the longest road but 2 or more players tie for the new longest road, set the longest road card aside. Do the same if no one has a 5+ segment road. The longest road card comes into play again when only one player has the longest road of at least 5 road pieces. Maritime Trade. On your turn, you can trade resources using Maritime Trade during the trade phase, even without involving another player. The most basic and unfavorable exchange rate is 4-1. You may trade 4 identical resource cards to the supplier in exchange for 1 resource card of your choice. You do not need a harbor settlement at a harbor location to trade. You do not need a harbor in parentheses settlement at a harbor location to trade at 4-1. So when nobody wants to trade. If you have built a settlement, a city at a harbor location, you can trade more effectively. There are 2 different kinds of harbor locations. Generic harbor, 3-1. Here you may exchange 3 identical resource cards for any 1 other resource card during your trade phase. Special harbor, 2-1. There's only 1 special harbor for each type of resource with the same symbol. So if you earn plenty of a certain type of resource, it can be useful to build on the special harbor for the resource type. The exchange rate of 2-1 only applies to the resource shown on the harbor location. A special harbor does not permit you to take any other resource type at a more favorable rate, not even 3-1. Number tokens. The 18 number tokens are marked with the numerals through 2 to 12. There's only 1 2 and 1 12, and there's no 7. The more often a number is rolled, the more often each associated hex produces resources. And 8 and 6 are the numbers that are rolled the most frequent, but probably also the numbers that are most frequently attacked by the robbers since they are so valuable. The letters on the back there are no letters on the back in this case, I'm sorry. P. Path. Paths are defined as edges where 2 hexes enter frame meet. Paths run along the border of 2 terrain hexes or between a land hex and the frame. Only 1 road can be built on any path. At each end of a path is an intersection. Progress cards. Progress cards are a type of development card. They have green frames. There are 2 each of 3 varieties. Road. If you play this card, you may immediately place 2 free roads on the board according to normal building rules. And then there's invention, and I'm gonna go into these in the card video, so so that is that. You may play only 1 development card during your turn, and I'm sorry that I just started and didn't finish. Resource cards, resources, in parentheses, resources. There are 5 different types of resources. There's crops from the crops tile with the straws on it. There's brick from the tile with the rectangles that are made out of kind of Play-Doh, so they feel kind of like clay, I guess. There's ore from the tile that is with the bumps that are made out of hot glue. There's wood, that is from the tile that is where there's like popsicle sticks on top. And then there's sheep, and it is represented by felt on the tile. These resources are represented by resource cards. You receive these cards as income from the resource production of these hexes. And there's only always, also for the development cards, the first letter, but there is a card that will say what letter each represents. So it's C for crops, W for wood, and S for sheep, etc. Resource production is determined by the dice roll at the beginning of each turn. You receive your income for each Terran hex adjacent to your settlements or cities every time the production number is on the hex is rolled. Exception C. Robber. Resource production. On your turn, you must roll the dice for the turn's resource production. The number rolled determines which hexes produce resource. Okay, I'm sorry I got interrupted again, so I'm gonna start at resource production again. Resource production. On your turn, you must roll the dice for the turn's resource production. The number rolled determines which hexes produce resources. Each number appears twice, except for 2 and 12, which only appear once. All players who have settlements or cities on the hexes indicated by the roll receive the yields, resource cards, of those hexes. Each settlement produces 1 resource card and each city produces 2 resource cards. It is possible that during the game there will not be enough resources in the bank to supply all of the yields. If there are not enough resource cards to give every player all the production they earn, then no player receives any of that resources that turn. Exception: if the shortage of resource cards only affects a single player, give that player as many of these resources as are left in the supply and any extras are lost. In either case, production of other types of resources is not affected. Resource trade. In the second phase of your turn, you may trade with the other players. The other players may not trade among themselves, only with the player whose turn it is. There are 2 different kinds of trade: domestic trade and maritime trade. Roads. The roads connect your settlements and cities. You build roads and paths. You cannot build new settlements without also building roads. Roads provide victory points only if you hold the longest road. Special card. Only 1 road may be built on each path. You can build roads along the coast. Robber. The robber begins the game in the desert and is moved only by rolling a 7 or playing a night card. If the robber is moved to any other Terran hex, it prevents that hex from producing resources. Players with settlements and or cities adjacent to the target Terran hex receive no resources from this hex as long as the robber is in the hex. Rolling a 7 and activating the robber. If you roll a 7 for resource production, none of the players receive resources. Instead, 1, each player counts their resource cards. Any player with more than 7 resource cards must choose and discard half of them, so it's 8 or more resource cards. Return discards to the supply stacks. If you hold an odd number of cards, you round down, so if you have 9 resource cards, you discard 4. Then you, the player who rolled the 7, must move the robber to the number token of any other Terran hex or to the desert hex. This blocks the resource production of this hex until the robber moves to another number token or the desert. 3. After discarding occurs, you also steal 1 resource card at random from a player who has a settlement or city adjacent to this new hex. If there are 2 or more players with buildings there, you may choose from which one to steal. The robber must be moved. You may not choose to leave the robber on the same hex. After moving the robber, your turn continues with the trade phase. See also Knights. S. Settlements. A settlement is worth 1 victory point. Settlements are built on intersections, where 3 hexes meet or 1 or 2 hexes meet the frame. You share in all of the resource production of each Terran hex adjacent to your settlements. You must meet 2 conditions when building a settlement. Your settlement must always connect to one or more of your own roads. You must observe this distance rule. For an example of the distance rule, just so I already explained the distance rule, but yeah, it's just like you cannot build right next to a settlement or city. At least you cannot build a settlement or city right next to a settlement or city. It doesn't matter if it's yours. But you can build roads next to them. Yeah. Setup phase. Begin the setup phase after you build the game map. Everyone chooses a color and takes the corresponding game pieces. 5 settlements, 4 cities, 15 roads, and 1 building costs card. Sort the resource cards into 5 stacks and place them face up beside the board. Shuffle the development cards and place them face down beside the resource cards, and put them all in the card boxes. Place the 2 special cards and the dice beside the board, and the dice also in a box. Place the robber in the desert. The setup phase has 2 rounds. Each player builds 1 road and 1 settlement per round. Round 1. Each player rolls both dice. The player who rolls highest is the starting player and begins. The starting player places a settlement on an unoccupied intersection of their choice, then places a road adjacent to the settlement. The other players then follows clockwise. Everyone places 1 settlement and 1 adjoining road. When placing all other settlements, the distance rule always applies. Round 2. Once all players have built their first settlement, the player who went last in the first round begins round 2. That player builds their second settlement and its adjacent road. After the starting player builds, the other players follow counterclockwise, so the starting player in round 1 places their second settlement last. The second settlement can be placed on any unoccupied intersection as long as the distance rule is observed. It doesn't have to connect to the first settlement. The second road must attach to the second settlement, pointing in any of the 3 directions. Each player receives their starting resources immediately after building the second settlement. For each Terran hex adjacent to the second settlement, take a corresponding resource card from the supply. So the starting player, the last to place the second settlement, begins the game. That player rolls both dice for the resource production. You can find helpful tips about setup under tactics. Setup. Soldier cards. Some early editions of Catan had soldier cards. These are now called knight cards. See knight cards. Tactics. T. Since you play Catan with a variable map, the tactical considerations of each game are different. Unless you play it with the beginner setup. There are nevertheless some common points you should consider. Brick and wood are the most important resources at the beginning of the game. You need both to build roads and settlements. You should try to place at least one of your first settlements on a good forest or brick hex. Do not underestimate the value of harbors. For instance, a player with settlements or cities on productive fields should try to build a settlement on the crops harbor. Leave enough room to expand when placing your first 2 settlements. Look at your opponent's sites and roads before making a placement. Beware of getting surrounded. If you plan to build toward a harbor, the middle of the island may be a tricky place for a starting settlement, for it can easily be cut off from the coast. The more you trade, the better your chances of victory. Even if it's not your turn, you should offer trades to the current player. T. Trade. Oh, yeah, I also already said T. Sorry. Trade. After you roll for resource production, you may trade with other players. Domestic trade or with the bank Maritime Trade. You may trade as long as you have resource cards. If you decide not to trade during your turn, no one can trade. You may trade with another player between your turns, but only if it is that player's turn and they elect to trade with you. You may not trade with the bank during another player's turn, and you may not give away cards, or you may not trade development cards, and you may not trade like resources. So like 2 sheep for 1 sheep, you can't do that. Victory point cards. V. Victory point cards are development cards, so they can be bought. These orange framed. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. No, orange framed in our case. And that's also like in the thing that I will, in the extra video that I will talk about. But it's important that you only reveal them when you have 10 victory points. And for example, if you have like 5 settlements and 1 city, which would give you 7 victory points, and you have 2 victory points, and then or you have 3 victory points and 4 settlements and 1 city, so you only have 1 victory point left. You do not reveal your cards yet, and then you decide during your turn to build a settlement. Then you have 7 victory points without the victory point cards, and then you reveal them and say, I'm done with the game, and that ends the game. But you don't reveal them before you have 10 victory points with the cards. Yeah. A general note on Catan rules. This is the 5th English language edition of Catan, aka Settlers of Catan. Over the years, the rules have been clarified, refined, and occasionally updated. As of January 1, 2015, all of the rules in this version of Catan take precedence over any previously published rules. Of course, you can always decide to play it otherwise if you want to, but that's the official version as of now. Victory points. The first player to reach be at 10 victory points on their turn wins the game. Players acquire victory points for the following: 1 settlement equals 1 victory point, 1 city equals 2 victory points, longest road equals 2 victory points, and largest army equals 2 victory points. And a victory point card, 1 victory point card equals 1 victory point. Since each player begins with 2 settlements, each player begins the game with 2 victory points. Therefore, you only need 8 more victory points to win the game. Hint: in Catan you will often see, oh yeah, that does not matter for ours. Yeah, that was the Almanac. I hope you do not have any more questions, and if you do, maybe someone else will know it, because that is about all that I know about the game, and I think the internet will always have a good answer. I certainly hope you do not have any more questions, so I hope you enjoy the game, and yeah, have fun.